She was given 30 lashes for saving a wounded stranger, not knowing that he is the Alpha King. The forest lay in a heavy silence, broken only by the distant cry of a crow and the rustling of dry leaves. Mist clung to the undergrowth like a living thing, curling around the roots and rocks, hiding dangers in its gray embrace. Leora moved carefully, her bare hands brushing over herbs she had gathered earlier, each step deliberate, yet her mind was far from the familiar routine of the forest. The villagers often whispered that the northern woods were cursed, that shadows lingered with eyes that watched, and that no one dared enter without reason. But Leora had never listened to whispers. Compassion was stronger than fear. And today, as she wandered deeper than usual, her heart led her to something she could not ignore. A faint groan reached her ears. Leora froze. The sound was soft, almost human, yet strained with pain. Her pulse quickened. She followed the sound, stepping carefully over twisted roots and wet earth. Finally, in a small clearing shrouded by mist, she saw him. He was lying against a fallen tree, his clothes torn and darkened with blood. One arm lay at an unnatural angle, and his chest rose and fell with labored breaths. Despite the grime and the injury, there was something in his presence that drew her in, something regal, something dangerous. Without thinking, she knelt beside him. "Are you alive?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He blinked, his eyes dark as midnight, filled with pain and something else she could not name. I am," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "But I am weak." Leora's hands shook as she tore strips from her scarf to bind his wounds. "Who did this to you?" she asked. The stranger's lips pressed into a thin line, and he did not answer. Fear crept into her chest, but it was drowned by determination. She had to save him. For hours she worked in silence, tending to cuts, cleaning dirt and blood from deep gashes, and whispering soothing words to calm him. Each touch was careful, deliberate. She noticed the strength that lingered beneath his exhaustion, the sharp intelligence in his eyes, and the quiet authority that seemed to hum around him even as he lay on the cold ground. Finally, as the sky darkened and the first stars glimmered, the stranger stirred. He tried to rise, but pain forced him back to the earth. Leora's heart ached to see him suffer. "You must rest," she said softly. "I cannot do more tonight, but I will stay until you are safe." He studied her silently, as if weighing her words. Then unexpectedly he whispered, "You are brave." Leora felt her chest tighten. Bravery was not something she considered herself to possess. Compassion, yes. Fear, often. But bravery, it was rare and dangerous, and sometimes it led to punishment. She said nothing, simply nodded and continued to tend his injuries. The next morning, the village erupted in chaos. Word had spread quickly that Leora had been seen with a stranger in the forest, a man who was not of their land, a man whom rumors claimed could be an enemy of the kingdom. The villagers gathered in the central square, their voices rising like thunder. The elders, stern and unyielding, declared that harboring a stranger in these troubled times was treason. Leora's hands shook as they dragged her to the punishment area, her mind racing. "I did no wrong," she said, her voice firm despite her fear. "He was wounded. I saved him." "You defy the laws of the kingdom," the head elder said, his voice sharp as the iron of his cane. "Compassion is no excuse for treason. You will be punished for your crime." The punishment was brutal. 30 lashes, they said, each one a reminder of obedience and fear. Leora's eyes stung with tears as she was bound to the post. She did not struggle, though her heart raced like a war drum. Each lash fell with precision, and each one tore at her flesh and spirit. Pain and shame mingled, but so did a strange, unshakable resolve. She had acted out of kindness, and no punishment could erase that truth. The crowd watched, some in horror, some in quiet satisfaction. Leora's vision blurred with tears and blood, but she could not forget the stranger in the forest. The thought of him stirred her heart, a strange warmth amidst the cold terror. Then from the shadows she felt eyes on her, eyes that were not like the villagers', eyes sharp, dark, and commanding. She raised her head slightly, and for a fleeting moment their gaze met. He was there, the stranger, the man she had saved, the one whose life she had clung to in the forest. Her heart froze. He stepped closer, moving through the crowd as though it were invisible to him. The villagers did not see him, or they did not dare acknowledge him. Leora could barely breathe. His presence was overpowering, like the calm before a storm, like the weight of a mountain pressing down on her chest. As the final lash fell, the stranger finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. "Stop this!" The crowd gasped. The elders faltered. Leora blinked in disbelief. The man who had appeared as fragile and wounded in the forest now stood as if the very air bent around him. His presence demanded obedience, his authority undeniable. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice weak. Pain still burned along her back, but it was nothing compared to the sudden, electrifying realization in her chest. "I am no one you know," he said quietly, almost regretfully, his dark eyes studying her with intensity. "And yet, you risked everything for me." The crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves, fear and awe in equal measure. Leora sank to the ground, trembling, unsure whether to thank him, fear him, or simply understand what had just happened. He knelt beside her. His hand hovered over hers, though he did not touch her. "You have a heart few possess," he said softly, "bravery and kindness, dangerous gifts in a world like this." Leora looked at him, a mixture of awe and confusion in her gaze. Why save me?" she asked. "You saw what they did." His eyes darkened with shadowed emotion, a mixture of guilt and admiration. "Because I saw something in you that I have not seen in centuries," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "A strength that even the strongest kings fear to find." She felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something about him, something familiar, something terrifying. She wanted to ask who he was, to understand the man who had saved her life and yet remained a stranger. But the words caught in her throat. Finally he stood, tall and commanding, and looked down at her. "Rest now. There are still dangers beyond this village that you do not understand, and I will ensure you are safe." Leora's mind spun. "Safe from what?" "From the shadows that hunt us," he said, voice heavy with unspoken meaning. "And from yourself, from the world that fears your courage." The wind whispered through the trees as he turned and disappeared into the mist as silently as he had come. Leora was left trembling on the ground, her back raw and aching, but her heart pounding in ways she could not explain. The world seemed larger now, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. Yet somehow, it also felt full of possibility. For the first time, she understood that compassion could be a weapon. That bravery could be a curse and a gift at the same time, and that the man she had saved, the wounded stranger, was far more than he appeared. And in the shadows, watching her, he allowed himself the smallest, rarest of smiles. For centuries, he had ruled with fear and power, and yet here was a mortal woman who had risked everything for someone she barely knew. Something deep within him stirred, something he had not felt in ages. The forest held its breath, the wind whispered secrets through the trees, and Leora realized that her life and her heart would never be the same again. Cliffhanger. Leora felt it before she saw it, the lingering presence of something old and relentless, a threat that would test not only her courage but the fragile bond forming with the mysterious stranger who, she would soon learn, was far more powerful and dangerous than she could imagine. The mist clung to the forest like a living veil, thickening around Leora as she stumbled forward. Though the village square's chaos had ended, her back still burned from the lashes, each movement sending sharp pain through her muscles. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the memory of the stranger, the dark-eyed man who had watched her suffer, his presence commanding, yet filled with a strange gentleness. Before she could think, a shadow moved among the trees, gliding silently toward her. She froze, expecting another threat, but instead the man stepped into the clearing, his cloak brushing the undergrowth. His wounds were gone, as if the forest itself had healed him overnight. "You should not wander here alone," he said, his voice a low melody that carried authority without cruelty. I cannot return home," Leora admitted, rubbing her aching back. "The villagers, her voice faltered. "I saw," he said. His eyes, dark and endless, met hers. "They punished you for courage, yet courage is what keeps the world alive." Something in his words stirred both fear and trust within her. "Who are you?" she whispered. You saved me, yet you watch from the shadows. Why?" He studied her, silent for a long moment, and then finally said, "I am Kaelin, but you do not need to know my name yet. You need only to trust me." Leora blinked. The name carried a weight she could not understand, and yet beneath the fear a strange hope rose in her chest. She nodded, barely understanding why. Trust was dangerous, yet she sensed that without it, she would not survive the world that now seemed to stretch before her, wide and dark. Kaelin moved toward her, guiding her gently through the forest. The mist seemed to part before him, as if the very air recognized his presence. They walked in silence, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional cry of distant creatures. Every so often, Leora's hand brushed against a tree, grounding herself in the reality of the forest. Hours passed, though the sky barely brightened. Finally, they arrived at the edge of a high cliff, overlooking a valley shrouded in fog. Below lay Kaelin's castle, a labyrinth of towers and spires that rose like jagged teeth from the earth. Windows glowed with flickering torchlight, and the walls hummed with quiet magic that made the hair on Leora's arm stand. "This is your home?" she asked, awe mixing with fear. Kaelin nodded. "It has been my fortress for decades. Few enter and fewer leave willingly. Here you will be safe." Leora swallowed, looking up at the dark stone walls, feeling both dread and wonder. Safe from what? Kaelin's gaze drifted toward the valley. "From those who would harm you, from those who would harm me, from the world that punishes what it does not understand." Inside the castle, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of old stone and burning wood. Shadows clung to the corners, flickering as torches lit the hallways. Leora followed silently, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with fascination. She had never seen a place like this, grand, ancient, and yet tinged with something dark, almost sorrowful. Kaelin led her to a small room near the heart of the fortress. "Rest here," he instructed. "I will send someone with food. You must regain your strength." Leora sank onto the bed, the pain in her back reminding her of the lashes. But the room was safe, quiet, and for the first time since the punishment, she felt her heartbeat slow. Yet she could not shake the feeling that she had stepped into a world far larger and more dangerous than anything she had known. That evening, Kaelin returned. He brought with him a small tray of food and set it on the table beside her. His presence filled the room, and Leora felt both warmth and fear in equal measure. "You do not eat," he said quietly, noting her hesitation. "You must regain your strength." I do not know if I should trust you," she admitted. Her voice was steady, though her hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress. Kaelin's dark eyes softened, though the intensity never left them. "Trust is difficult," he said, "especially when the world teaches you to fear. But sometimes trust is the only way to survive." She looked at him, searching for any sign of deception. All she found was truth, harsh, commanding, and impossible to ignore. Tentatively she ate, her hands shaking slightly as she balanced a piece of bread. "Why did you save me?" she asked after a moment, unable to hold her curiosity. "You could have left me to the lashes." Kaelin's eyes darkened. "Because I saw something in you," he said quietly. "Something I have not seen in centuries. Courage, yes. Compassion, yes. And something more, a strength that defies the world." Her heart fluttered, but she said nothing. The words were both comforting and terrifying. Strength was dangerous, especially in a world that punished women for daring to act with courage. Yet Kaelin did not punish her, he honored it. Over the next few days, Leora began to explore the castle, though always under Kaelin's watchful eye. She discovered libraries filled with ancient texts, hallways that twisted like a maze, and windows that looked out onto the endless forest. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of Kalen's presence, a quiet authority that demanded respect and attention. And yet beneath that authority there were glimpses of something softer, something almost human. He would pause to listen when she spoke of her village, nodding thoughtfully. Occasionally, a flicker of humor would lighten his otherwise somber expression. But always the darkness lingered beneath the surface, a reminder that he was more than a man. He was a ruler, a warrior, and something older, more dangerous than she could imagine. One evening, as they walked through a quiet corridor lined with torches, Leora asked the question she had been avoiding. "Kalen, you are not like anyone I have ever known. What are you truly?" He stopped, turning to face her. The torchlight flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp lines and the intensity of his gaze. "I am a king," he said simply. "But more than that, I am a man bound by duty, by power, and by a curse that has followed me for decades." "A curse?" Leora's voice trembled. "What kind of curse?" Kalen looked away, his jaw tightening. "One that punishes those I care for, one that makes love dangerous, one that makes trust a risk. I have lived for centuries with it, and it has cost me more than I can name." Leora felt a shiver run down her spine. "Then why risk saving me?" His gaze returned to hers, dark and piercing. "Because even with the curse I could not allow you to suffer, not when your strength, your heart, shines so brightly." The words left her breathless. She had expected cruelty, distance, fear. Instead, she found respect, recognition, and something more, something dangerous to admit even to herself. That night she could not sleep. The candle beside her flickered as she lay in bed, thinking of Kalen, the man whose life she had saved, whose presence filled the castle with a quiet power that left her both terrified and mesmerized. She wondered who he really was, what he had endured, and why she felt her heart racing whenever he appeared in the doorway or spoke her name. Meanwhile, in the high towers of the castle, Kalen watched over her. Though she slept, her pain from the lashes still lingered, and he could not help but worry. It was a rare feeling for him, concern, almost like fear, for someone other than himself. He had ruled through strength, fear, and cunning, yet here was a mortal woman who had made him feel something he had not felt in centuries. Days passed, and Leora learned more of the castle and its strange rhythms. She met the servants and guards, who treated her with quiet respect, though always careful of Kalen's presence. She began to notice the subtle magic that lingered in the halls, in the torches that burned without oil, in the stones that hummed softly when touched. But just as she began to feel a measure of safety, a new danger emerged. In the dead of night, a shadow moved through the outer walls, silent and deliberate. Leora sensed it first, a prickling at the back of her neck, a sudden chill in the air. Kalen, already alert even in sleep, moved to her side, his hand brushing her shoulder in a protective gesture. "They come for us," he whispered, his voice taut with tension. "You are not yet safe, Leora. The world beyond these walls will not forgive courage or compassion easily." Her heart pounded. For the first time, she understood that the stranger she had saved, and now lived among, was not just powerful. He was a force the world feared. And she was now a part of that world, whether she wished it or not. Cliffhanger. Eyes glowed in the darkness. Shadows shifted with intent. And Leora realized with a shiver that the danger she had escaped in the village was only the beginning. The forest, the castle, and even Kalen himself were entwined in a web of secrets and threats, and she was caught at the heart of it. The wind howled through the towers of the castle, rattling the old windows and carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into every corner of the stone halls. Leora sat by the window in her small room, the candlelight flickering across her pale face. Though Kalen had promised safety, the unease from the forest lingered in her bones. Her mind replayed the glowing eyes in the mist, the shadows that had seemed alive, and she could not shake the feeling that something was coming for her, for Kaelin, for the castle itself. She rose, her bare feet pressing against the cold stone floor. Quietly, she moved through the hallways, drawn to the library at the heart of the fortress. The scent of old books and polished wood filled her senses, and she felt a strange calm among the rows of ancient texts. There she began to seek answers, answers about Kaelin, the shadows in the forest, and the curse he had hinted at. Hours passed as she pored over the tomes, reading of kings and queens, battles won and lost, and curses that lingered for centuries. One volume, bound in black leather and etched with silver runes, caught her attention. Its pages spoke of rulers whose hearts were bound by magic, whose touch could bring both life and death to those they loved. She felt a chill run down her spine, as though the words were written for Kaelin alone. A sudden sound made her start, a soft, deliberate footstep behind her. She turned, and Kaelin stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You should not be alone," he said, his voice low, almost warning. "The castle is old, but not empty of danger. There are those who move in silence." Leora closed the book gently. "I need to understand," she said. "You told me about a curse. I want to know what it is and why it matters." Kaelin stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "It is a burden I have carried for centuries," he said, his eyes dark and heavy. "I cannot touch those I care for without risking their lives. I cannot love without danger following them. Every bond, every feeling has been a threat to those I hold dear." She stared at him, fear and awe mingling in her chest. "But why risk me then? You could have left me to the lashes, to the village. You could have let me suffer." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "Because I could not. Something in you, your courage, your heart, it called to me. I cannot explain it, but I knew that to leave you would be wrong, even if it costs me everything." Leora felt her breath catch. She wanted to ask more, to understand fully, but the words stuck in her throat. There was so much about Kaelin she did not know, yet so much about him that she felt she could never forget. Before she could speak again, the library door slammed open, and a shadow darted through the hall. Leora gasped, and Kaelin moved in an instant, drawing a dagger that shimmered with a strange, cold light. The shadow took the shape of a figure, tall, masked, moving with unnatural speed. Kaelin's eyes darkened. "It begins," he said. With a swift motion, he hurled a spell that lit the shadow ablaze with blue fire. The figure screamed, retreating into the walls, leaving behind a faint trace of smoke and dark energy. Leora stepped back, trembling. What was that?" "An assassin," Kaelin said, his voice tight. "Sent by those who wish to harm me or the kingdom. You are now a part of this, whether you like it or not. And you are in danger as long as you remain by my side." Fear gripped her heart, but she nodded. Somehow, despite the danger, despite the fear, she could not turn away. She had chosen to help him once, and now, even in the face of shadows and curses, she could not abandon him. The following days were filled with preparation. Kaelin trained her in the ways of the castle, how to move silently, how to recognize threats, and how to read the subtle shifts in the air that often preceded danger. Leora found herself growing stronger, not only in body but in spirit. She discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. Kaelin watched her closely during these lessons. At first, his attention was purely protective, but over time, she noticed the way his gaze lingered, the way his voice softened when she succeeded at even the smallest tasks. He began to share fragments of his life with her, stories of battles fought, allies lost, and the loneliness that had been his constant companion. "I have ruled for centuries," he said one evening as they walked along the castle's highest balcony. "And yet I have never known trust, never known companionship that was not shadowed by fear, until now with you, and even now I cannot be certain it is safe." Leora felt a pang in her chest. "Then why stay near me? If it is dangerous, why not send me away?" "Because I cannot," he admitted quietly. "I have watched you from the forest, I have seen your heart, and I cannot leave you to the world that would destroy you. Not now, not ever." The wind whipped around them, carrying with it the scent of rain and the distant forest. Leora shivered, partly from the cold, partly from the intensity of his words. She wanted to step closer, to reach out, but fear held her back. She did not yet fully understand him, and she did not know whether trust would save her or destroy her. That night sleep did not come easily. Leora lay in her bed, listening to the wind and the faint hum of the castle's ancient magic. She thought of Kaelin, of the dangers that stalked them, of the strange, unspoken connection growing between them. She wondered if the shadows in the forest were only the beginning, or if they were a warning of greater storms to come. Morning brought no relief. The castle was alive with tension. Guards whispered of strange movements in the forest, of lights that flickered where no torches should burn, of shadows that moved with intention. Leora felt a chill each time she stepped outside her room, but she also felt a growing strength within herself. She had survived the lashes, she had faced fear, and now she was learning to face power itself. Kaelin called her to the central hall. "There is more to know," he said, his tone urgent. "The assassins are only the beginning. The curse I bear is not the only danger. There are those in the kingdom who would see me fall, and they will use any means to do so, including you." Leora's stomach tightened. I want to help," she said. "Tell me what to do." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. "You must understand the rules of power," he said. "Courage alone is not enough. Strength alone is not enough. You must learn to see what is hidden, to anticipate what is coming. And even then, survival is not guaranteed." For weeks, they trained, prepared, and watched. Leora discovered the hidden passages of the castle, the secret wards that protected its halls, and the ancient texts that spoke of magic older than the kingdom itself. Kaelin revealed little of his personal power, showing her only what she needed to survive. Yet even in restraint, his presence was overwhelming. Every gesture, every word, every glance held weight, authority, and something else, something softer, almost human. One evening, as they practiced in the courtyard, a messenger arrived on horseback, cloaked in rain and mud. He handed Kaelin a sealed letter which he read silently, his face darkening with each word. "They have moved," he said finally, turning to Leora. "A faction from the eastern lands has conspired against me. They will strike soon. You may be their target." Leora's heart pounded. "Then what do we do?" "We prepare," Kaelin said, his jaw tight. "We defend and we face them together. I will not allow you to be harmed." The next night the shadows came. Figures moved through the castle's walls, unseen by the guards. Kaelin and Leora stood at the heart of the fortress, ready. The clash was swift, brutal, and filled with the strange hum of ancient magic. Leora's heart raced as she dodged, ducked, and moved with a precision she had never known she possessed. Kaelin's power was fierce, overwhelming, yet controlled. He fought not for domination but for protection, and for the first time, Leora felt the full weight of his heart behind every strike. By the time dawn broke, the attackers had vanished. The courtyard was scarred, the castle walls smudged with evidence of battle, and Leora's hands shook from exhaustion. She looked to Kaelin, who stood tall, unyielding, yet strangely softened by the relief that they had survived. He approached her slowly, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You have done well," he said quietly, "far beyond what I expected. You have strength and courage and heart." Leora looked down, unsure how to respond. She had faced shadows, curses, and death, yet the most terrifying part was the connection she now felt with Kaelin. It was magnetic, consuming, and dangerous. Cliffhanger. The curse is not broken, the shadows are not defeated, and the heart of danger is yet to come. Leora turned toward Kaelin, fear and longing in her eyes, knowing that the trials ahead would test not only their courage but the fragile bond forming between them, and that the next choice could cost them everything. The sky was heavy with storm clouds, dark and low over the castle. The wind tore through the towers, carrying with it the scent of rain and the electric tang of danger. Leora stood at the edge of the balcony, her hair whipping around her face, her back still tender from past punishments and battles. Her heart pounded, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what she had learned. The shadows from the forest were only the beginning. The conspiracy against Kalen, the curse that bound him, and the danger that followed them both had reached its peak. Kalen appeared behind her, tall and commanding, his dark cloak flapping in the wind. His eyes, always intense, were sharper than ever, scanning the horizon. "They are coming," he said. "The faction that seeks to destroy me and everything I protect will not stop until the castle falls." Leora nodded, swallowing her fear. She had trained, observed, and faced death alongside Kalen. She had learned courage in ways that no ordinary life could teach, and she was ready. "Then we face them," she said, her voice steady. "Together." Kalen's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, as he studied her. "You are no longer just a healer," he said quietly. "You are my equal in heart and mind, even if the world has yet to recognize it." Before Leora could respond, a flash of light erupted in the courtyard below. Figures moved through the fog, their shapes indistinct, yet their intent unmistakable. The enemies had arrived. Kalen moved swiftly, his command over the castle and its hidden magic immediate. Walls shimmered with protective wards, torches blazed with magical fire, and shadows shifted to shield them from the attackers. Leora felt a shiver of awe. The man she had once thought fragile in the forest now commanded the storm itself. But her awe was mixed with fear, for every shadow they banished, more emerged, their movements precise and relentless. Kalen turned to her. "Stay close, watch but do not hesitate," she nodded. Together, they moved through the castle, a strange symmetry of power and courage. Leora's knowledge of the halls and secret passages allowed them to evade traps, while Kalen's skill and magic struck down enemies with controlled fury. Each moment tested her strength, and yet she did not falter. She realized that courage was not about avoiding fear, but about acting even when every instinct screamed to run. Hours passed in a blur of motion and tension. The attackers were persistent, skilled, and ruthless. But Kalen and Leora moved as one, a silent bond of trust forming with each breath, each shared glance. In the midst of chaos, Leora glimpsed the man behind the legend, the king who carried centuries of burden, who had feared love and trust, and yet now stood exposed in his vulnerability, relying on her. Finally, in the heart of the castle, the battle reached its climax. A figure emerged from the shadows, a leader among the conspirators, wielding dark magic older than anything Leora had ever seen. The air thickened, the walls themselves trembling as he unleashed his power. Kalen stepped forward, his presence a wall of unyielding force. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice carrying a weight that echoed through the halls. The attacker laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "She is nothing to you," he said. "And you are a king, but even kings fall." Kalen's eyes darkened, and for a moment Leora felt the full force of his power. Shadows twisted around him, the air shimmered, and the ground seemed to respond to his will. But even as he prepared to strike, Leora stepped forward, her own courage rising like a flame. "You will not harm him," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not while I stand." The attacker froze, momentarily surprised by her bravery. Leora felt the strange warmth of trust and connection flow between her and Kalen, and in that moment something shifted. Kalen's curse, the danger that had always kept him apart from those he loved, trembled at the edges. Together, they faced the dark magic, a combination of Kalen's power and Leora's courage forming a force neither could have wielded alone. Spells clashed, shadows screamed, and the air seemed to hum with the energy of their bond. Leora realized that trust, courage, and love could be as powerful as any magic, perhaps even more so. With a final surge of effort, Kalen unleashed a wave of force that shattered the attacker's power, sending him sprawling and defeated. The shadows lifted, the castle settled, and a quiet fell over the halls like a blessing. Leora sank to the floor, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her heart was full. Kalen knelt beside her, his expression softening as he studied her face. "You have saved more than yourself tonight," he said quietly. "You have saved me from fear, from loneliness, from the curse that has haunted me for centuries." Her eyes filled with tears. "We saved each other," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I could not have done this alone, and you risked everything for me." Kalen's hand brushed against hers, gentle and deliberate. The touch was both terrifying and comforting. "I would risk it 1,000 times over," he said softly, "even if it meant breaking the curse that has bound me for centuries." The curse, long a shadow over their lives, began to falter. Kalen could feel it weakening, its hold loosening with the power of trust and courage they had shared. For the first time in centuries, he could imagine a life not bound by fear, a life where love was not forbidden. Days passed in quiet healing. The castle, though scarred from battle, began to feel alive again. Leora moved freely through the halls, learning more of Kalen's world, his past, and the burdens he had carried. Their bond deepened, no longer just a shared need for survival, but a connection forged in trust, courage, and mutual respect. One evening they stood together on the highest tower, looking out over the forest. The sun broke through the clouds, painting the land in gold and silver. Leora felt a sense of peace she had never known, yet beneath it lingered the memory of danger, the shadows that had followed them, and the lessons they had learned. Kalen turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You have changed me," he said. "You have shown me that strength is not power alone, but compassion, that courage is not fearless, but persistent, and that love is not a weakness, but a force greater than any magic I have known." Tears filled her eyes. "And you have changed me," she said. "You have shown me that even in darkness there can be light, that even in fear there can be trust, and that even the most broken hearts can heal." For a long moment they stood in silence, the wind carrying their shared understanding. Then Kalen reached out and took her hand, holding it firmly yet gently. "Then let us face the future together," he said. "Not as king and subject, not as protector and protected, but as equals, as partners, as something more." Leora nodded, feeling the truth of the words in her heart. "Together," she agreed. The castle seemed to sigh, the ancient stones humming with approval as if recognizing the union of courage, trust, and love. Outside, the forest was still, the shadows that had once threatened them now diminished, yet not gone. Leora and Kalen knew that challenges would come again, that the world beyond the castle walls was full of danger and uncertainty. But they also knew that they would face it as one. Weeks later, the castle gates opened for the first time in centuries. Villagers who had once whispered of Kalen's cruelty now bowed in respect, marveling at the bond between the Dark King and the healer who had tamed not only the shadows, but the heart of a ruler feared by all. Leora walked beside Kalen, their hands brushing, their eyes meeting with quiet understanding. The past had left scars, but the present held promise, and the future, a path they would walk together. As night fell, they stood together on the balcony once more, watching the stars emerge above the misty forest. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving the sky luminous and vast. Leora leaned against Kalen, feeling the warmth of his presence, the strength in his hand, and the certainty that they had both been transformed. And though the world remained imperfect, filled with shadows and secrets, they had found something stronger than fear, stronger than danger. A bond that could endure, a love that could heal, and a courage that could face any storm.